treasure chamber.
So the question is, why isn't the Book of Enoch in the Bible? Well, because it's quoted in the book of Jude, it means we need to work out why Jude quoted from the Book of Enoch, specifically because Jude, the apostle, validates the Book of Enoch by quoting it. And so when people reject the Book of Enoch, they have to reject the book of the Epistle of Jude, and therefore they're starting to reject some canonical books. So I was going to answer, in a quite short video as to the reason why that is. If we look at the canon, because it's an Old Testament book and one of the oldest books that we have, it says the Hebrew Bible consists of 24 books of the Masoretic text. Here is the answer to part of the question as to why the Book of Enoch is not in the Bible. It is because in this particular canon, because there's different canons, it says there's no scholarly consensus as to when the Hebrew canon was fixed. Some scholars argue that it was fixed by the Hasmonean dynasty in 140 to 40 BCE, while others arguing that it was not fixed until the 2nd century or even later. So, and again it says the Jewish scriptures outside the Torah and the prophets were fluid, with different groups seeing authority in different books. So we know you had the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Samaritans, the Essenes, and they all had their own different doctrines and different accepted scriptures. We've got here the earliest and most explicit evidence of a Hebrew canonical list comes from Josephus. So he was from 37 to 100 AD. He wrote about a canon used by the Jews in the 1st century AD. In Against Appian, Josephus in 95 AD divided sacred scriptures into 3 parts: 5 books of Torah, 13 prophets, and 4 books of hymns. And the quote is, we don't have an innumerable multitude of books among us disagreeing from and contradicting one another as the Greeks do, but we have only 22 books which contain the records of all the past times, which are justly believed to be divine. And of them 5 belong to Moses, which contain his laws and traditions, and the interval of time was little short of 1,000 years, but as to the time from the death of Moses till the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, who reigned after Xerxes, the prophets who were after Moses wrote down what was done in their times in 13 books. Okay, so we keep going down this page, which is the development of the Old Testament on Wikipedia. This is important to point out. It says in 1871, Heinrich Graetz concluded that there had been a council of Jamnia, or is it Hamnia, or Yavne in Hebrew, or is it Javne? Is that a J or a Y? Some people say it's a J when it's written as a Y, which had decided Jewish canon sometime in the late 1st century. This became the prevailing scholarly consensus for much of the 20th century. And it says that this theory is discredited. So if we keep going down the page, we'll come to different canons and different books. And we'll pretty much get our answer as to why, or I'll give you the answer as to why Enoch is not in the Bible. Here we are. I'd lost it then for a minute. So these are the Old Testament canonical books that we have commonly. The only real difference being is that some of them exclude the Apocrypha here. Some include them. But then we have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which includes Enoch. And that is where we get the Book of Enoch from. It was a complete Book of Enoch that's included in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. And then in 1947, a fragmented copy of the Book of Enoch was discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the complete parts of the fragmented scroll matches exactly pretty much exactly, I think, the same Book of Enoch in the Ethiopian canon. So we have this match between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Ethiopian Orthodox. So the main prevailing idea I've heard was that there wasn't really an agreed canon of books until the late 1st century or 2nd century, when the Jews, after the siege of Jerusalem, had relocated and decided on the these Pharisaical Jews had decided on this canon, and this seemed to get passed down to the early Christian church, or shall we say the early Nicene church, who are credited really with compiling canon. So they're apostates by creed. But there was an attempt to create a canon around 170 AD, which is called the Muratorian canon. But that was to do with New Testament scriptures. So the reason that people are having a hard time with trying to work out whether or not the Book of Enoch should be in the Bible is because if we look at Jude, the epistle, it takes a quote straight from the Book of Enoch. Now, in doing that, the author, who is Jude, has then validated the Book of Enoch as a scripture according to that apostle. And if it's according to that apostle, it'll be according to all the apostles. And so for that reason, the apostles took the Book of Enoch as a scripture. And if that was the case, it also validates, in my opinion, this idea that it was written by Enoch, which I believe that it was taken by Noah onto the ark when there was the flood. And he would have preserved the books from Adam down to himself. And so, because this is in the canon, this is taken straight out of the Book of Enoch. Because it's in the canon, what it's showing us is the people who compiled the canon, who were not the apostles, they have omitted books that they wanted to omit for whatever reason. We don't know the reasons as to why that is, but it's quite interesting when you look at the reasons for when you look at the reasons as to why these particular churches or councils agree on a canon. There's a fragment called the Muratorian fragment, or the Muratorian canon, which we're going to go to now. And this is the earliest known New Testament canon that we have, which is it's sort of written in a primitive Latin. It would have been written by the Church of Rome around, like I said, around 170. But these are the books of these New Testaments, not the Old Testament. But what I'm proving here is that the compilers of the Bible came later, because This Muratorian canon, this Muratorian fragment, it's very early. The Bible, as we know it, in its form, would have been compiled in the 4th century. So I've been using this Muratorian canon to sort of base my Bible version on this. So when we go to the canon that they compiled at the Church of Rome, what's interesting to me is because there's a note in this canon list where it says we can date it to the second half of the 2nd century because the author refers to Pius I, Bishop of Rome. He was the apostate, as recent. So we can see here this gives us a date. They wrongly judged the shepherd to have been written by Pius's brother. What I'm getting at is you can see that they don't really know a lot of the stuff that went before them, even though it was only like a century later. So if we go down to the canon list, we can see that what was accepted and what was rejected in this Muratorian canon list. So you can see the Muratorian canon on the left, present canon on the right. So they've got the 4 Gospels, they've got Acts of the Apostles, they've got all Paul's epistles. Then we get to Hebrews, interestingly not accepted in the Muratorian canon. And the reason for that was that they knew Paul didn't write that, which I find really interesting because it validates my theory that it was written by Clement. But again, interesting that they've not accepted it as canon. Then we have James' epistle, not accepted. 1 and 2 Peter, not accepted. 1 John was probably accepted. The 2nd and 3rd may be accepted. Jude was accepted. And then we have the other books, the Revelation of John. Strangely, Wisdom of Solomon, they thought it was written by Christians in recent time and not by Solomon himself. So we can see when people are, what I find is when people are canonizing a list of scriptures, I think it's a bit like if you came across a library of books that were owned by, let's say, the apostles, and then the apostles were martyred, and then you had a few bishops after them who continued running the churches, and let's say some of those died in the persecutions of the Romans. And then what happens is you'll get some, so we say, unspiritual men. They're not saved. They've inherited the position of bishop in the church. And it's like, look at all these books here. Let's go through them and see which ones we think are genuine. Whereas it's highly likely that if they were in possession of the church, they were all thought of as genuine. But you get this idea from these people who lack discernment that some are not genuine or some are being rejected or whatever it is. So, it is true that the heretics did write some books, but it would be strange that they would find their way into the church this early. And also not knowing that the Shepherd of Hermas would have been written by Hermas at the time of Paul the Apostle, which was around, Shepherd of Hermas would have been written around 50 AD. So, the fact that they didn't know this, but Pius I apostatized them. So as soon as you put apostasy in there, you're negating the new covenant. You're putting a stumbling block in there. You're putting idols in there. And so this is why I think the Roman Church fell off halfway through the 2nd century into apostasy. So the answer to the question, why is the Book of Enoch not in the Bible? It is because the apostles did not make canon. If the apostles would have made canon, the Book of Enoch would have been in canon. But we're talking the apostles 1st century and the compilers of the Bible 4th century. So, you've got 300 years later, you've got a group of men who are trying to come up with a primary list of books that should be read in their churches and they were not on the same level at all as the apostles. So you could say that the shoes were too big to fulfill. So that's basically the answer to the question.